if you saw part one of this dissection of the ridiculous Rob Reiner interview of James Clapper and John Brennan, you would realize that you have three people who are basically working around the biggest lie that's been told in American history. They are talking about Russian collusion, which is a crime that nobody can seem to figure out what it actually means. You see tons of instances of them talking about sources and methods and tradecraft and how they've never seen anything of the sort. Well, do they ever get down to specifics? I think that they sort of dance around it and try to start talking about money and connections and links and whatever. But notice when we continue through the sequence of these three clowns, one of them a Hollywood director, the other two being former spy chiefs, we realize that in reality, Hollywood and the intelligence services have no interest in actually delivering the truth. They want to deliver a message that is easily digestible by their moronic followers.
Well, to the extent that you can hide the money, hide the disguise sources of funding for political action groups, which may be quite legitimate. They'll use financial instrumentalities to hide the passage of that funding to political movements or interest groups. But I do know that collusion is clearly a tool in the kit bag that the Russians will use. Right. So any way they can co-opt somebody, right, recruit them, influence them, even on where the party that they're recruiting is unwitting, they'll do it. And I suspect they did so at every opportunity where they saw an opening, they'll exploit it.
But following that financial trail is so critically important on so many aspects of national security. We do it in the terrorism realm. We do it in the counterintelligence realm. We do it in the proliferation arena as well. And the FBI financial investigators, as well as the intelligence community financial analysts, they are tremendous. And that's why I do have confidence that Bob Mueller and others are going to get to the bottom of some of this by tracing the money and see what might have, circumvented the normal procedures for moving money. And was there a motivation, a political motivation behind it, either on the giver or the receiver's part?
I mean, listen, we talk about, our system, our democratic way of life came under attack. I mean, we use those terms, because they attacked an election. But we don't talk about it in terms of war. I mean, it's cyber war, and it's there's no tanks, there's no planes, there's no infantry. I mean, there's none of that. And yet, perhaps Putin thinks of it as, because if you say it's been going on for a long time, which it has been, since probably the Tsarist days, it is a war. It's a war for wrestling for an ideology, whether or not democracy is going to survive. He's been trying to undermine it for forever. So in his mind.
Okay, so let's talk a little about what collusion actually means. We have, from my previous presentation about Year of the Rat, parts 1 and 2, you had $150,000 through the CLI temple to Al Gore. $150,000 in 1996. Was that not collusion? You have Norinco and the CP Group, two Thai and Chinese linked organizations that directly contributed $679,000 to the Democratic National Committee for the Bill Clinton campaign in 1996. And this was after Norinco was caught by federal agents smuggling 1,000 automatic machine guns into the USA. And you can see this from my previous video and hear the whole story. You have Nina Wang. I know this photo disturbs a lot of people, but she was caught donating $50,000 to refurbish Bill Clinton's childhood home in Hope, Arkansas. What is a Hong Kong billionaire whose husband mysteriously disappeared in 1990? Why is she contributing to $50,000 to refurbish his childhood home? You have Anglep Singh, who later was caught giving $500,000 in a bribe to John Ash, who donated $330,000 in cash and $1 million in wire transfers to the Clinton campaign through Clinton crony Charlie Treat. So how much more of this evidence do we need? And why is it that back then, when Mr. Clapper was serving various positions in the NSA and in other surveillance agencies, how come none of that came to light as collusion? How come they didn't care about that? Well, the answer is that the standard of collusion depends on whether the deep state, whether the intelligence services believe that the person accused of collusion is actually on their side of the turf or is on the opposing team. And with Donald Trump, clearly they're willing to go as long as they can without providing actual concrete evidence. Remember, they're talking about collusion and they're talking about Russia, and bizarrely, this is one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. Rob Reiner starts talking about the Tsar, like Russia's been trying to screw with us since before the Soviet Union. So who's the madman here? Is it me, who I have ample evidence? Ample evidence. Here, Ted Chiang, other billionaires who have been millionaires and billionaires who have been donating hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Clintons back in the 90s. Ted Chiang, $400,000. What more proof do you need?
You know, our system, our democratic way of life came under attack. I mean, we use those terms, you know, because they attacked an election. But we don't talk about it in terms of war. I mean, you know, it's cyber war, and it's you know, there's no tanks, there's no planes, there's no infantry. I mean, there's none of that. And yet, perhaps Putin thinks of it as, I mean, because if you say it's been going on for a long time, which it has been, since probably the Tsarist days, it is a war. It's a war for wrestling for an ideology, whether or not democracy is going to survive. He's been trying to undermine it for forever. So in his mind, it is a war. So how do we respond?
Yeah, I think we have to strengthen that cyber environment, certainly. We learned some very painful lessons because of 9/11. But as a result of 9/11, the Congress established a commission, the 9/11 Commission,
right,
that tried to address those gaps, those shortcomings. I have been a long proponent of having a similar type of commission established by Congress, an independent commission, that can take a look at what we need to do in the future to better protect and safeguard that environment, and have the engineers and futurists and technologists and scientists and U.S. officials and private sector, all of them getting together, something akin to a major undertaking to look at it strategically. So trying to strengthen that environment, and it's not just against attempts to interfere in the election, but also, again, criminals and terrorists and pedophiles and others. And I don't think we as a country have yet come to terms with what the role of the government is in.
This is the official 9/11 Commission report, and we're going to look at the 8 references to the internet here. So on page 91 it says, during the 1990s, the rise of round-the-clock news shows and the internet reinforced pressure on analysts to pass along fresh reports to policymakers at an ever faster pace, trying to add context or supplement what their customers were receiving from the media. So that's nothing about Al-Qaeda infiltration of the U.S. using the internet. This is from page 157. It says, it's talking about some of the hijackers and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. It's saying, for instance, he collected Western aviation magazines, telephone directories for American cities such as San Diego and Long Beach, California, brochures for schools and airline timetables, and he conducted internet searches on U.S. flight schools. So that's using the internet for research. Are you going to now police that? What does that have to do with collusion? Nothing to do with Al-Qaeda collusion in the United States. Then you have over here, it's one of the hijackers or co-conspirators. It says, described as an insecure follower with no personality and with limited knowledge of Islam, Bahaji nonetheless professed his readiness to engage in violence. Atta and bin al-Shib used Bahaji's computer for internet research as evidenced by documents and diskettes seized by German authorities after 9/11. So that's 3 different references to the internet in the report, but nothing regarding collusion and use of the internet to hack anybody. Then it's this one saying, following Midar, so this is one of the hijackers talking about the investigation. He prayed with his housemate each morning at 5 a.m. and attended services at the Islamic Center. He borrowed his housemate's computer for internet access following news coverage of fighting in Chechnya and Bosnia. So that's sharing news. That's just reading the news. Is that a problem here? So then here's another one. It says, with his housemate's help, Hazmi also used the internet to search for a wife after obtaining Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's approval to marry. What does that have to do with the terror aspect of 9/11? Using the internet to search for a wife? Is that going to be prohibited? Then this talks generally, this is on page 376, the settling is difficult. The combined gross domestic product of 22 countries in the Arab League is less than GDP of Spain. 40% of the adult Arabs are illiterate, 2/3 of them women, 1/3 of the broader Middle East lives on less than $2 a day, less than 2% of the population has access to the internet. So this is just talking, if anything, they're saying that one of the problems is they didn't have access to the internet back during the era of 9/11. And then it says here, these are recommendations, it looks. So one of the bullet points of this agenda of opportunity, look up, agenda of opportunity, is more vocational education is needed too. In trades, business skills, the Middle East can also benefit from some of the programs to bridge the digital divide and increase internet access that have already been developed for other nations of the world. And then, in the footnotes, it says Shehi and other members of the group used to frequent a library in Hamburg to use the internet. But it doesn't say what they did on the internet. So I want to be clear about what John Brennan meant. He didn't mean that the 9/11 report was attributing the blame to the internet. But if you actually read through the report, some of the recommendations are to increase internet access in the Middle East. And that's somewhat been augmented since 9/11. But his real recommendation, which he talks about in the video, is that the United States set up a commission to deal with basically internet trolling and spread of propaganda or whatever. A Russian collusion panel to attribute what happened in an election to internet trolling, and then to deal with the problem of internet trolling by bringing together big tech like Google, Facebook, and all of that. So make no mistake, what Brennan is saying is that based on the 9/11 Commission report, which of course solved all the problems. I mean, there's no terror since 9/11. I mean, what the hell? John Brennan has it right. We can just go build off of the 9/11 Commission report and say, now we're going to do the same thing with Russian hacking. We're going to fuck the internet over in order to compensate for an election that you lost, Democrats. So that's basically the message here.
Why do you think that didn't happen? I mean, when the buildings were hit, or when the bombs hit Pearl Harbor, we all came together as a country. We knew we had been attacked in some level. Now, I understand this is a much more insidious type of attack that you don't feel right away, but it is an attack at the fabric of democracy. There's no question about it. Why isn't it that we didn't respond the way we, why wasn't there, George W. Bush standing on the pile of rubble saying, you'll hear from all of us? I mean, well, our democracy was attacked.
Precisely because we didn't have a pile of rubble. Things in the physical domain that you can see, feel, and touch, destroyed buildings, people killed, wounded, injured, that has a much more apparent, immediate and indelible impact on people than something in the cyber domain, which is a bit more ethereal, and it's hard to, doesn't have physical attributes, so it's harder to get your arms around.
Well, for instance, after 9/11, George W. Bush was reluctant initially to have a 9/11 commission because, obviously, from a political standpoint, you know, he might be blamed for not, you know, being more proactive or whatever. But ultimately, he agreed to do it because the country's security and the protection of our country was more important and trumped any kind of, personal, political gain that he had. But I don't see that now. I don't see that, and that's what scares me.
It really comes down, I think, to leadership. As long as the occupant of the Oval Office continues to refute the unanimous assessment of CIA, FBI, and NSA about what they did, and continues to ignore, I think, the real challenges to our system of government by what the Russians and others can do, it undercuts any effort to try to deal with this issue comprehensively, strategically, and thoughtfully. And until that leadership that comes out of the White House is really going to say, this is critically important for our future as a country and as a democracy, it's going to be a really tough road.
And while
It's actually quite ironic that Rob Reiner talks about George Bush being a leader when in 2004 he was a vocal supporter of Vermont Governor Howard Dean in the primaries. He actually has this quote where taking their place on the campaign trail were celebrities, actor Martin Sheen, who plays President Josiah Bartlett on The West Wing, and director Rob Reiner, began a 2-day campaign swing on behalf of Dean. This was in January 2004. And Dean says, "I'm going after everybody because I'm tired of being the pincushion here," Dean said on Monday of that week. He told several audiences that if they wanted to change Washington, they should not vote for a Washington politician. He singled out Kerry, Edwards, and Gebhardt by name for supporting the Bush administration's war with Iraq. Dean is also using criticism from his Democratic rivals, Republicans, and GOP-leaning interest groups to take in even more cash. He collected about $1 million last week, spokesman David Carl said Monday. And then you have, they didn't say much about the war now, did they? This was Dean. They didn't say much against No Child Left Behind either. Who was the one who was willing to take on George Bush when his popularity was at 70%? But there's more about Rob Reiner from 2003. Activist Rob Reiner told University of California, Berkeley students that voters failed to exercise due diligence in the 2000 election of George W. Bush as president, or in the 2003 recall election that named Arnold Schwarzenegger California's next governor. And he even said, the problem we have right now in Washington is we don't have the face of a leader. However, Reiner, who said he is a friend of Schwarzenegger, also added that the governor-elect has an intellectual curiosity that President Bush lacks, and Schwarzenegger is a self-made man while Bush grew up in a family of privilege. Schwarzenegger's outsider status makes him uniquely positioned to break from traditional political ties in the pursuit of solutions to California's difficulties. He said the governor-elect made a wise decision not to sign a no new taxes pledge because there's just no way the state can continue without this happening. So Rob Reiner can be very generous today about Bush's accomplishments with the 9/11 Commission, but in 2003, when talking about the California politics and how Schwarzenegger and Bush were both incompetent, and in 2004, when supporting Bush's harshest critic in the race, Howard Dean, he wasn't saying any sort of praise for his conduct during the 9/11 Commission and during the wars at the time. In fact, it was quite the opposite. He was walking around with Martin Sheen, who was another celebrity critic of Bush, who considered him unforgivably incompetent. And by the way, they teamed up again last year after Trump got elected. So in my opinion, these are just celebrities that, they spout off, and after a certain amount of time, they consider it as if people have forgotten what they said in the past.
that. I mean, I understand, his feeling like maybe it's going to delegitimize his election, and I don't know. We don't know where any of these investigations are going to go. but we're talking about our country. Our democracy's at stake here. So
Well, when we briefed, John and I and
you
others
guys were there
briefed
when this happened.
the president-elect at the time on January 6th, I think he viewed what we presented to him, which had very high confidence levels in what we presented him, which, by the way, a point I'll make, had nothing to do with the dossier. We did not draw on the dossier. The dossier, the infamous dossier, was not a part of our intelligence community assessment.
Right.
What we did present, we had very, very high confidence level in. And I believe his first reaction to it was that this caused a question about the legitimacy of his election, which wasn't the intent at all. And yeah, I get it, that's important. But the bigger issue here, and what is bothersome to me, is the singular indifference to the threat posed by Russia.
To me, the way I see it, it goes beyond, not pushing back. There's been an active, effort on the administration's part to denigrate the intelligence community, to denigrate law enforcement and the Justice Department. And to me, that's the most disturbing, because we're talking about it's one thing to say fake news, and the media is, destroyed, or he tries to destroy the credibility of the media, but he's trying to destroy the credibility of our security system.
Well, I have said consistently that in the case of the intelligence community, I believe the intelligence community as an institution will continue to convey truth to power. And whether the power accepts that truth or not, well, that's another issue. Now, I don't know how long that can be sustained. I do worry about that, but I believe the fundamental instincts of the community are to do the right thing.
Okay, so let's discuss a little about why the American people have such a deep distrust in the American intelligence community. Could it be because intelligence personnel like both Brennan and Clapper were responsible for the failure of the U.S. intelligence community prior to 9/11, or during the run-up to the war in Iraq, or during the run-up to the Syria bombing of last year, when they claimed that there was evidence that the Assad regime used chemical weapons on their opposition, even though now there's been a revelation that there is no proof of that? Could it be that, or could it also be that they can't seem to keep their story straight, just like I can't seem to keep my speech straight? So it says here, this is from the Tablet magazine, but they do an analysis, and it says that Chuck Todd asked John Brennan if the intelligence on George Papadopoulos came through the CIA versus via the Five Eyes thing, referring to the intelligence sharing relationship between the five English-speaking powers, the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. Brennan's response, though, went off script. He wasn't going to get into details about how it was acquired, he explained. But the FBI has a very close relationship with its British counterparts, and so the FBI had visibility into a number of things that were going on involving some individuals who may have had some affiliation with the Trump campaign. British counterparts, the Times report, based on interviews with former and current U.S. and foreign officials, that claimed that the Australians passed on the tip. Did the Times get that part of its story wrong? Perhaps Downer, Australia's former foreign minister, had told British police who passed it to the FBI. Or maybe Brennan misspoke or misremembered. What seems more likely is that the former CIA director told the truth. Informed sources in Washington have been whispering for months that Britain's intelligence service, the General Communications Headquarters, the UK's version of America's National Security Agency, was intercepting the emails and phone calls of Trump officials. It's not impossible, a former high-ranking U.S. intelligence officer told the author, that the information came from the Brits. Under certain circumstances, we can search their database, and they can search ours. Our intelligence sharing relationship with the UK is much closer than it is with anyone else. By far the closest we have, but something like that wouldn't be routine in our relationship. Luke Harding of The Guardian, apparently one of the few journalists with access to Steele, first reported April 13 that GCHQ had played a central part in uncovering Trump's possible ties to Russia and forwarding the information they had directly on to John Brennan. The next day, CNN published a similar report. Citing U.S. and UK intelligence sources, Harding wrote, GCHQ played an early prominent role in kickstarting the FBI's Trump-Russia investigation, which began in late July 2016. According to one account, reported Harding, GCHQ's then head, Robert Hannigan, passed material in summer 2016 to the CIA chief John Brennan. The matter was deemed so sensitive it was handled at director level. After an initially slow start, Brennan used GCHQ information and intelligence from other partners to launch a major interagency investigation. Brennan has himself previously taken credit for initiating the inquiry. While on Meet the Press, Brennan suggested that the British sent their intelligence onto the FBI. In his May testimony before the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, he indicated it came from him directly. I was aware, Brennan said in May, of intelligence and information about contacts between Russian officials and U.S. persons that raised concerns in my mind about whether or not those individuals were cooperating with the Russians, either in a witting or unwitting fashion, and it served as the basis for the FBI investigation to determine whether such collusion cooperation occurred. So Brennan continues, I wanted to make sure that that every information and bit of intelligence that we had shared with the Bureau FBI so that they could take it. It was well beyond my mandate as director of CIA to follow on any of those leads that involved U.S. persons. But I made sure that anything that was involving U.S. persons, including anything involving the individuals involved in the Trump campaign, was shared with the viewers. In other words, the FBI investigation didn't start when the Australians, according to the Times, or the Brits, according to Brennan's most recent version of the story, contacted the FBI after the Papadopoulos Downer meeting. No, it started when the director of the CIA decided to start an investigation, when Brennan passed on information and intelligence to the FBI and signaled that the Bureau better act on it.
The denigration of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the premier law enforcement organization on the planet, which is composed of 35,000 plus people. They're humans. Do they make mistakes? Sure. Does the Bureau make mistakes as an institution? Yes. But overall, when you think about what the Bureau does for this country, day in and day out, rank and file, patriotic, dedicated professionals all over this country and all over the world, keeping this nation safe and secure. And I wish we could keep that in perspective.
Yeah, the comments coming out of Mr. Trump's mouth have been very dispiriting to the professionals at CIA, FBI, NSA, and others who really dedicate their lives with great sacrifice, and certainly very dispiriting to their families that make great sacrifices on behalf of their loved ones, as well as it sends, I think, a very bad message to the people of the United States, which is that these are the institutions that were established to protect our democracy, our security, our safety. It also sends a very bad signal to the world that if the person who holds the title of president denigrates, disparages the work and the professionalism and the integrity of the FBI and CIA and others, how then is the rest of the world going to look at those institutions? How are the CIA and FBI going to be able to work with counterparts around the globe on issues related to, life and death matters, whether it be terrorism or proliferation or whatever, or interference in democratic systems? So the power of those words that have come out, I think, cannot be sort of understated. And I'm hoping we're going to be able to get through this very, very, I think, very sad chapter of our history. But I have great confidence that the professionals that Jim and I work with at the organizations are trying to do their very best to protect this country, because that's why they do what they do. They love this country, and irrespective of the denigration, irrespective of the lack of honesty and integrity of the people at the highest levels of government, the professionals and intelligence and law enforcement will do their work.
This part of the video is pure political grandstanding. What Brennan and Clapper are trying to do is to make it sound like Donald Trump, through the mere force of his words, is making it harder for the FBI to do their job. Now, first of all, these people were not involved in the FBI. The only reason that they don't have Jim Comey in this video is because enough people on the left and within the Hillary Clinton camp also hate Jim Comey because of his decision to reopen the Hillary Clinton email investigation about a week before the election. So essentially, we're talking about two people who they're trying to say, well, The only reason that this investigation can't really gain public confidence is because Donald Trump is undermining the confidence through his public statements against it. But if you look at the transcripts of all of their testimony to Congress and their backtracking, and Brennan saying that the dossier didn't play uh, into his intelligence assessment, and Clapper also echoing that, we do see that there's very little to keep their story straight. It's almost as if they want uh, the record to reflect their agenda and not the actual acts and deeds that they accomplished during their time in the intelligence services. So you see, what I found was sort of entertaining was Rob Reiner nodding and smiling at all of their proclamations. I wonder if he would have been so charitable with that type of um, that type of speech where they're claiming any criticism and denigration of the intelligence services undermines security during the Bush administration.
Resources that we've been given is the wisdom of the founding fathers to create a constitution upon which we can build this wonderful, now 241-year experiment that we've had. And my fear is that those pillars of that institution are being torn away. The press, the law enforcement, intelligence, and we're seeing no checks and balances coming from the Congress. That's my fear. And the question I always have is, is our Constitution created strong enough to withstand this kind of assault?
I hope and pray that that Constitution, which has stood us in great stead for many, many years, will sustain us through this bad period. But in the end, it's how we as a nation and how the nation's leadership, and I mean by that both the Congress and the administration, the executive branch, how well they abide by it.
The President of the United States needs to speak with the greatest amount of precision, honesty, and integrity, because he or she speaks to the world, and he or she serves as a role model every moment of every day.
People who have held very high positions in the intelligence community, as you guys have, obviously, don't normally come out and speak out the way you have been speaking out. What is it that the reason you come out? Why do you do that?
For me, this has been very difficult. I've toiled in the trenches of intelligence for every president since and including John F. Kennedy. My dad was an Army officer. I've been a political appointee in both Republican and Democratic administrations. So I've always been instinctively apolitical. The oath of office you take, though, is not to a person. You don't pledge loyalty to a person. You pledge loyalty to the Constitution. And because our institutions that underpin this country are under assault, both from external sources, Russia, and internal sources, that I need to speak.
Both Jim and I and other senior intelligence officers love this country, and we have worked long and hard to do what we could in our own little individual ways to contribute to this country's safety and security. I never thought I would witness what I've been seeing over the past year as far as what is happening to our government, the dishonesty, the lack of integrity, the lack of ethics. We spent our lives looking at foreign governments and countries and analyzing them and seeing how corruption and incompetence and ineptness and lack of ethics undermined the ability of countries to thrive. And I never thought I would see some of those similar types of traits and attributes here.
So we end the video. Is there any evidence presented? No. Is there any actual talk about specifics about what went on? Almost nothing. They don't even talk about what Russia supposedly did, which as of the publishing of this video, mine, it only amounts to internet trolling using fake accounts. And for them to claim, oh, we had no idea that something would ever, and Brennan actually says in the last clip, I don't think I would ever see anything like what we've seen in this instance. It's like, you've never seen anybody use a fake account for anything? What are you, like, a million years old? You know, this is the type of thing that has been going on all the time, not just with politics, not just with national security. People open fake accounts for all sorts of things. Sometimes it's just for jokes. So I think that when you watch like the breadth of this video, you get the sense that these are two intelligence officials and a Hollywood director that are basically trying to, you know, frame the story in the context of, well, Donald Trump, he has hurt our feelings. He has made us feel insignificant. He makes it sound like the problem that we think is the end of the world is nothing. Well, I'm sorry, but when I see James Clapper, who lied about state surveillance by the NSA of private internet browsing, or he lied about other instances of spying on foreign governments. Then you see John Brennan talking about integrity and you know, the truthfulness and being precise. Well, he was a Homeland Security advisor to President Obama when Benghazi happened, and you know, President Obama lied about Benghazi, and so did Hillary Clinton. They both persisted with a bunch of stories about it being due to an internet video. So this is more of the same crap from the same people, and it's a partisan shit show. And I don't care if anybody's registered Democrat or Republican. It is partisan in that it supports the idea that the intelligence agencies and the cooperative parties in the government are the ones who should determine the truth, and anybody who questions them is some sort of subversive or a foreign stooge. So that's it. Please comment on my video. I'm also going to leave the link to part 1 of the video below, and that's all I have to say for tonight. So please share, like, subscribe, and as always, you can find all my videos on Bold Like a Leopard.